Paul's gonna tell us about the farm.
Farm in Glenwood, Utah. We used to go down there, 5 kids and mom and dad and a dog, and
How did you get down there? In a wagon?
Old cars, no seat belts, and we'd take turns sitting on the floor because there were so many of us.
How long did it take you to get there?
3 or 4 hours on Highway 89.
Doing what, 50 miles an hour?
Yep, going through every little town. The really strange thing was, the last town before you get to Glenwood was Venice, and I'd never heard of Venice, Italy, until later on. Loved it. Isn't that funny? And I learned to ride horses. I learned to drive trucks and cars.
Driving the tractor?
The tractor when I was 13. I used to sleep in the same room with Grandma and Grandpa. The thing I loved about them was when they'd have dinner and stuff, they'd get around the table, kneel down at their chairs, and then hold hands and say prayers. It was really beautiful.
She'd make homemade bread every day, and the kids would take the bottom out of the bread and eat the insides.
And he had a dog named Mike that followed him everywhere.
And the Native American people would come down, knock on the door, and she'd give them food.
Really? The Indians would?
Yeah, they would. I remember my great-grandma, only saw her once. She had long white hair. Grandma was out combing it in the backyard. And the Indians would come in, "You got bread?" And I played the organ there several times that Art would sing in the Glenwood Ward. I got to play for both their funerals in Glenwood.
Okay, my turn.
76 and 86. They died 10 years apart.
Go to the fish hatchery. I remember the fish hatchery.
Yeah, the thing that was weird is my parents were married on September 4th, and so were Lois and Vern. Isn't that strange?
Huh.
Okay, so what one?
My mother's dad died when she was 9, and then she lived on right there by Judge Memorial on 10th. And later she met my dad, and he was in the Air Force during World War II and was flying planes over Korea, Philippines. And I was with my mother. I was born while my dad was overseas and living with my grandmother. I was happy that he came home alive because a lot of the pilots at that time didn't come home. So he came home when I was over a year old, when he finally came home from the war. And then he bought a service station, and he owned this Phillips 66 service station for many years. And then he went to work for Osprey Charters.
4 South by Pioneer Park on 3rd.
But he ended up being a full colonel. He stayed in the reserve unit and was a full colonel when he died with the Air Force.
That's a big deal.
Yep.
Next step is a general after that, right?
Yeah, it is.
It was colonel.
Full colonel.
And then
He
general.
wouldn't talk
Had his
about
full
the
birth.
war because it was.
He never
depressing.
talked about the war because it was
depressing.
very traumatic,
Mm-hmm.
and they saw a
He
lot
was
of
a bomber
things that.
pilot, so they
Yeah, he
don't
was a
talk
bomber pilot,
Yep.
and they lost several of his buddies on missions.
And your dad was Army, right, Paul?
He wasn't
Your
in the
dad?
military.
No, he
He
never-
got married.
I thought he was
Mother
Army.
and Dad met at the BYU. They got married, and then he got out of it.
He was a
fireman.
firefighter. He was a
He was a
fireman.
He was a
Okay.
fireman.
But he sold cars at Menlo for.
He was a
15
fireman,
years.
yeah.
Retired after 25 years. He was tired of it. He almost
Yeah, he was
got
a
killed
fireman.
twice. And everybody would say, "Do you want to be a fireman?" I say, "No way. It's too much work and dangerous."
All right, good stories. Okay.
Good stories.
Good
Okay.
time.